Hello once again, I'm Matt Donnelly, and this is the Fantasy Points Friday Night Hype Show for week number 15. And we are going to jump right into the action this week as we are going to preview the Miami Dolphins versus the Buffalo Bills, the Detroit Lions versus the New York Jets, the Tennessee Titans versus Los Angeles Chargers, and the New York Giants taking on the Washington Commanders. But before we get into those games that I'm hyped for, we need to talk about some of these injuries, especially how they pertain to your fantasy football rosters here for that first round of the fantasy playoffs, starting with Kyler Murray, ACL. He is out for the season. Lamar Jackson, PCL. He is not going to be available here in week number 15. I probably wouldn't count on him in week number 16 either. Kenny Pickett, Tyler Huntley, Russell Wilson, all questionable with concussions there. Mike White, they're calling it a rib injury, but I'm pretty confident that his internal organs were turned into soup by that Matt Milano hit. Now we have Damian Pierce. He's got that ankle injury. He's not going to be available this week. And then we got Ramondre Stevenson, another ankle injury at the running back position. Jeffrey Wilson, he's got a hip injury. Treylon Burks, another concussion. Cortland Sutton dealing with that hamstring injury. Deebo Samuel, he has that knee injury that's going to be holding him out for about 3-ish type weeks there, according to Mike Shanahan. So if you're counting him for the playoffs, forget about it, especially those fantasy football playoffs. He could be there for the NFL playoffs. DJ Moore, MCL sprain, ankle injury. He was spotted at practice earlier this week. Tyreek Hill, probable with an ankle. Corey Davis, he is still dealing with that concussion, as are wide receivers Devontae Parker and Richie James. You're starting to pick up on a little theme here. Concussions are back. It seems like every year this time of the year, we are talking about concussions. Daniel Bellinger there for the New York Giants. He's got a rib injury. And Brandon Cooks, he's got a calf injury. Make sure to stay up to date with all the latest injuries there, courtesy of Fantasy Points' very own DPT, Edwin Porras, and the Fantasy Points podcast for the injury updates heading into week number 15. Now, speaking of week number 15, there are some games that we need to talk about, and we are starting with Saturday performances here, as Jeff Saturday could become the first coach to either win or lose on his namesake day there. The first of 3 Saturday football contests. Yes, we are officially at the Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday NFL swing of things. It is the most wonderful time of the year there, especially if you are Matt Ryan, Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce, and Paris Campbell facing this Vikings secondary that has allowed 915 yards to receivers over the last 4 weeks. That is the second most in the NFL. Oh, and Justin Jefferson, he surpassed 1,500 receiving yards after an 11-catch, 223-yard performance against the Lions a week ago. Baltimore at Cleveland. That's the second game there on Saturday. J.K. Dobbins, he could be that league winner for you. Without Lamar Jackson last week, the Ravens ran the ball 71% of the times, and Dobbins, he manufactured 120 yards and a score on just 15 carries, looking explosive at times, making his return from the IR. The third game, the nightcap, if you will, Miami at Buffalo. We're going to get onto that a little bit more in a moment because that is one of those games that I am hyped to talk about. Now on Sunday, we have Pittsburgh at Carolina. The last 4 weeks, the Panthers have allowed the fewest fantasy points on a per-game basis to the running back position, allowing just 207 yards on the ground, 31 receiving yards, and 0 touchdowns. That works out to about 11.6 fantasy points, while Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, they nearly split carries a week ago, which is my way of saying fade Najee Harris in the first round of your fantasy playoffs. I beg of you. Philadelphia at Chicago, Justin Fields versus Jalen Hurts and that Eagles defense. Sign me up. Perhaps 2 of the most exciting quarterbacks facing off on the same day, on the same field. What more could you ask for? This is going to be a really good test for Justin Fields, as this Eagles run defense is going to present all kinds of challenges. And Justin Fields, he presents his own kinds of challenges for this Eagles defense. I also really want to see Miles Sanders just smash out there. Long live the dead RB zone. Now, Kansas City at Houston. Speaking of dead RBs, hey, Houston, they are the ones who resurrect running backs all season long. That said, Travis Kelce, he joined the 10,000-yard club last week and now has his eyes set on Tony Gonzalez and joining that 15,000-yard club. Kelce essentially has done this in 9 seasons. Yeah, I'm not counting the 2013 season. While Gonzalez, he played in the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s. Dallas at Jacksonville. Trevor Lawrence, he had a good week last week, but look, this week he faces a Cowboys defense that knows how to get after the quarterback, as they've done so 48 times this season, the second most in the league behind those Philadelphia Eagles, and it's more than just Micah Parsons that brings the heat. We're talking Doris Armstrong, DeMarcus Lawrence, and Dante Fowler. Now expect Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott to have big days, but after seeing what Chris Moore did to this Dallas Cowboys team out of the slot, Christian Kirk may lead all receivers this week in fantasy points. Yeah, Chris Moore, 10 catches, 11 targets, 124 yards. Atlanta at New Orleans. The one thing that I want to see is A.J. Terrell there shadowing Chris Olave. Two of the best in the game at the respective positions face off this week. Terrell, he has done an excellent job in coverage this season, going against the likes of Amari Cooper, Mike Evans, Terry McLaurin, and DK Metcalf. Arizona at Denver. Colt McCoy versus Brett Rippon. I mean, it is what it is at this point. With Kyler Murray lost for the season with that ACL and Russell Wilson unlikely to play due to that concussion. I mean, did you see the size of that knot on his forehead? I mean, there's no way he could possibly play this week. Now, McCoy, he's basically the perfect backup, and I don't know if that's exactly a compliment either. And Rippon, he basically force-fed Greg Dulcich and Jerry Jeudy just a week ago. New England at the Las Vegas Raiders. I wanted to include this in the main slate of my previews here, but I'm still in shock and disgust, and probably a little bit of both after last Thursday night's performance. Can the Patriots find a way to tackle Josh Jacobs, who since week number 9 has forced 36 missed tackles? Second on the list is Dameon Pierce with 19. Cincinnati at Tampa Bay. Maybe Tom Brady changes the whole game plan after the fact, but who cares at this point? Since Jamar Chase returned in week number 13, he has had a 45% first read share, second only behind Devontae Adams and the Raiders, and that is per Chris Weck there of Fantasy Points. You can catch him and more of this kind of information there over on Twitter at Chris Weck FF. With Higgins and Boyd status up in the air due to injury, the number is destined to increase even more this week. And on Monday Night Football, we have the Los Angeles Rams and the Green Bay Packers. 2 weeks in a row, we get Baker Mayfield in prime time. What a world we are living in. Mayfield versus Rodgers. Mayfield is fighting for a job next season, and Rodgers and the Pack, they're looking to stay alive in that playoff race. Cam Akers, is he going to get the ball? Is he not going to get the ball? Last week, 12 carries, 42 yards, and a touchdown with a 62% opportunity share. That's it. That's all the games I want to touch on. Now I want to get into the big-time previews, the games that I am hyped for here in week number 15, and we are starting with the Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills. The temperatures are dropping in Buffalo, but things are heating up in the AFC East as the Dolphins and the winter conditions blow into Buffalo this weekend as the 8-5 Dolphins face off against the division-leading 10-3 Buffalo Bills. The last time that the Miami Dolphins and the Buffalo Bills met, the Dolphins, they pulled out a 21-19 victory, but that was in about 120-degree heat. Now we got 9 inches of snow. It was not a good week last week for the Dolphins against the Chargers or the previous week against San Francisco. In fact, the whole left coast trip was kind of a disaster. At least they are back on the East Coast, and then at least we know that Penguins, Jalen Waddle, they enjoy the snow, right? Go a little bit of a waddle. Now, you'd think a trip to California would be good for you. Get a little sun, get a little bit of run game going on. Not so much. Miami, they failed to be able to run the ball against the Chargers. Basically, everyone's been able to run the ball. There's a simple solution here to fantasy football. You simply start running backs when they face Cleveland, when they face Houston, and when they face Los Angeles. And the Dolphins, they didn't exactly have much success in that ladder of the whole conversation. Now, combine the duo of Mostert and Wilson, they failed to top 70 yards on the ground. And Wilson, he ended up getting hurt along the way. We talked about that hip injury earlier on in that injury report. Per Scott Barrett's usage report on fantasypoints.com, Raheem Mostert handled 62% of the backfield XFP in week number 14. But prior to the injury, Jeff Wilson earned 4 of the team's 6 backfield touches. So assuming that everyone is at full health, I'd still be viewing Wilson as the lead back in a 60-40 committee. Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill are the first set of teammates this season to each surpass 1,000 yards receiving. While Hill has been producing at a historic pace, more on that here in just a moment, it's easy to lose sight of what Waddle's been able to accomplish. His 1,003 yards, that sits 7th in the National Football League. Miami sits 2nd in receptions of greater than 20 yards this season with 48, which is one of those stats that you can directly attribute to both Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Now, Tyreek Hill, he has slowed down somewhat after that record-setting pace there for the first 10 weeks of the season. I guess slow down is probably not the proper terminology here, as Justin Jefferson has probably just been heating up. Hill's 1,460 receiving yards, that trails Justin Jefferson now by 40 for the league lead. Hill's 3.54 yards per route run this season is still the most by any receiver since 2009, while Hill's 36% target share per route run over the last month is the most of any receiver. So it is within the ranges of outcomes that he and Jefferson, who are about 495 yards away, could both surpass Kelvin Johnson's 2012 mark of 1,964 receiving yards. Now, turning our attention to the Buffalo Bills, just when you thought it was safe to trust James Cook, Devin Singletary goes out there and gets a 59% opportunity share to lead this backfield, earning 9 touches to Cook's 5 against the New York Jets. Now, hopefully you were not trusting this Bills backfield as anything more than a flex play each and every week, as Josh Allen once again led this backfield with 47 rushing yards. Now, remember last week when I said the Bills backfield is like one serious dragon and 2 goofy looking ones? Well, I lied. It's Josh Allen and 3 goofy dragons. Now, speaking of no trust, how about Gabriel Davis? That's right. He needs to be firmly planted on your bench. If he goes off, he goes off. But under no circumstance should he be allowed back into your life. It's only going to lead to heartache later on. Davis, once again, did absolutely nothing. 3 catches for 31 yards. There's a good reason that the Bills would rather approach a one-legged Odell Beckham Jr. or a retired Cole Beasley to help out with their passing game. Now, Stephon Diggs, on the other end, that is a completely different story. If Xavier Howard was unable to hang with Mike Williams last week, what are the chances? What is he going to be able to do in coverage against arguably the best route runner in the game today? Last season, we saw Howard versus Diggs, as Diggs got the better of those matchups, scoring twice and hauling in 7 passes for 86 yards while having Howard in primary coverage. Back in week number 3, Howard was responsible for coverage on 57% of Diggs' routes there, which led to 3 receptions on 5 targets and 36 yards. Now, why does this feel like this is going to be one of those Josh Allen to Cole Beasley type weeks? I love myself some Isaiah McKenzie. My gut is telling me this is going to be a big return for the recently unretired Cole Beasley, or maybe that's probably just indigestion. You know what? It's so hard to tell from time to time. The last time that we saw Beasley with Allen, Beasley caught 6 passes for 60 yards in a playoff game against the Chiefs. With the addition of Beasley with Isaiah McKenzie working the underneath, maybe this will allow some more deep shots for Gabriel Davis. You know what? Sorry, I'm adding false hope here, and we're not about false hope on this show. Now, one of the more exciting offenses in the National Football League belongs to the Detroit Lions. So we're going to talk about the Lions and the Jets. Big-time playoff implications on the line this week as the 6 and 7 Lions look inch closer to a NFC playoff spot, while the 7 and 6 New York Jets cling to that final spot in the AFC. Justin Jackson, you need to go away. Just get away from this whole backfield altogether. It was already difficult enough to predict whether it was going to be DeAndre Swift or a Jamal Williams type week in and week out, without you coming in here and vulturing touchdowns. Williams, he continues to handle a majority of the snaps there, 26 to 23, and the opportunities 53% to 31%. But it's Swift who benefits when this Lions team needs to start throwing the ball around the field. On the season, the Jets, they sit 13th in rushing yards allowed at 1,126, but they are 20th in receiving yards allowed to the backs at 493. So in theory, this could be one of those game scripts that favors Swift. That said, Williams only needs the Lions to get to the 2-yard line, and we can see what he can do on the goal line, right? We know he's going to punch it in. That's what's going to happen. I don't even hide it anymore. I love this Lions offense. We talked about the backs. Now it's time to talk about these pass catchers and these matchups inside the matchups. Amon-Ra St. Brown versus the other Michael Carter. Michael Carter in the slot for the Jets is one of the best slot corners in the game today. DJ Chark, Josh Reynolds, Jamison Williams versus Sauce Gardner, and DJ Reed on the outside. These are going to be fun matchups to watch all day long. Hopefully, Jared Goff forgets that he's on the road. Now, per Graham Barfield stat pack there for week number 15 over on fantasypoints.com. Over the last 8 weeks, the Lions have scored on 47% of their possessions. That is the 4th best rate in the league over that span, trailing only the Cowboys at 49, the Kansas City Chiefs, and the San Francisco 49ers. We know what Amon-Ra St. Brown can do. Even in an underwhelming performance there last week, St. Brown still led this team in targets with 9. He still finished with 6 receptions and 68 yards. St. Brown became the first receiver in NFL history to accumulate 150 receptions and 150 rushing yards in the first 30 games of their career. I didn't even know there's a stat that people kept track of, let's be honest. But now let's talk about Jameson Williams. His first NFL catch ever was a 41-yard touchdown last week, and he has seen his snaps and his routes increase from 8 to 2 in week 13 to 12 and 5 in week number 14. Even St. Brown is excited to see what he can do. I can't wait to see what he does moving forward, man. That boy can roll. I'll tell you that right now. He can run. And we know this. If you followed anything from Jameson Williams in his college days at Alabama, Williams holds a single-season Alabama record for 4 touchdowns greater than 70 yards in that 2021 season. He would also finish that season with 1,572 receiving yards, which trailed only Devontae Adams' Heisman season there and Amari Cooper when it came to receiving yards in a single season at Alabama. For Jets fans, the first question you have to ask, what do Mike White's insides look like? How does Matt Milano get away doing with what he did to him? I mean, he did him dirty, but he was clean. It was a clean hit, I'm going to say, but he basically folded him up like a lawn chair. Now, the good news for the Jets and fantasy enthusiasts is that it looks like Mike White will be under center once again, facing a Lions secondary that is allowing the second most fantasy points to quarterbacks, 24 per game, and the most to receivers at 51.3 per game over the last 4 weeks. Against the Bills, Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore were asked to run routes more than ever before, running 46 times, while Moore saw 10 targets, hauling in 6 of them for 60 yards, while Garrett Wilson caught 6 of 7 targets for 78 yards. Now, Corey Davis, he had to leave early after suffering a concussion, which probably helped Elijah Moore get a few more looks in that contest, but it's now the second straight game in which Moore has seen 6 or more targets. I need to stop saying more. I mean, seriously, that's way too much going on. Wilson's 868 receiving yards this season are the 16th most in the league, which is even more impressive when you consider that the Jets actually let Zach Wilson attempt 189 passes this year. It's been a year to forget for tight ends. Let's call it the way it is. We are entering week number 15, and Tyler Conklin is sitting here as a borderline tight end 1 on the season, and you have to basically consider him a must start for your fantasy playoffs. I mean, that's literally where we're at right now. If Corey Davis does miss this contest, then it is reasonable to believe that Conklin could once again see at least 8 targets. Now, hopefully this time he can cash in on those opportunities. Last week, he's seen those 8 targets, 5 catches there, 28 yards. So that might be a little bit more difficult because the Lions, as much as they give it up to the quarterbacks and to the wide receivers, they've actually been fairly stout at defending the tight end position this season. Now, let's try and make sense of this Jets backfield. At quick glance, it shows that Michael Carter outsnapped Bam Bam Knight there, 36-34 in his first game back from injury. But the opportunities and the production, that heavily tilts towards Knight's favor. Knight would carry the ball 17 times for 71 yards and earn himself a 63% opportunity share. Now, I expect Carter to cut into that a little bit this week, but make no mistake about it, this is a full-out backfield split moving forward. And I would expect Knight to still see a majority of the carries, while Carter is going to be more heavily involved in the passing game. Sound like another backfield that we know that maybe we just talked about? Now, I know that you're going to be tempted here to fire up Bam Knight, but hear me out. Since week number 7, the Lions have not allowed a single back to produce more than 10 fantasy points, and they have faced some good ones. Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon, David Montgomery, Saquon Barkley, Devin Singletary, Travis Etienne, and Dalvin Cook. Now, 2 backs they haven't faced, Derrick Henry and Austin Eckler, they face off as the Tennessee Titans head to Los Angeles to take on the Chargers. With a win last week against the Dolphins and a return of some key contributors, the Chargers are looking to make a strong push towards the NFL playoffs and to help you in your fantasy football championship aspirations there as well. At 7-6, LA sits in a 3-way tie with New England and the New York Jets, with New England currently holding that tiebreaker. The Titans, they are also 7-6, but since the AFC is so bad, they've essentially earned themselves a bye right into the playoffs, even though they are on a 3-game losing skid. We talk about get-right games for running backs. Well, the Chargers' run defense is one that can certainly help a back going through hard times get back on their feet once again. Derrick Henry, since the bye, has either been stuffed or hit behind the line of scrimmage 51% of his carries and is averaging just 1.22 yards before contact. Now, LA, to their credit, held Raheem Mostert 37 yards and Jeffrey Wilson 26 yards to a total of 63 rushing yards in last week's victory. However, one game does not make a season, and the Chargers' DVOA is still ranked 25th on the campaign. If Treylon Burks misses once again this week, then the only pass catcher I trust for the Titans is Chigokonkwo, mostly because I just learned how to pronounce his name. And second, the tight end landscape is a place where fantasy dreams come to die. Basically, it's the NFL's version of Mortal Kombat's NetherRealm. That, and he is averaging 2.78 yards per route and coming off a 50% route share in back-to-back weeks, while posting 40 or more receiving yards in 4 of the last 6 Titans contests. If Okonkwo is going to continue to have success, then Ryan Tannehill will need to continue delivering when under pressure. Tannehill is hitting at around 7.5 yards per attempt when pressured, which is something that the Chargers, unfortunately, don't get a whole lot of since Joey Bosa went down, but they still have this Khalil Mack guy. Now, Tannehill on the season is attempting 7.8 yards per attempt and has thrown for 2,371 yards along with 13 touchdowns to only 5 interceptions to go along with a 96.3 passer rating, which sits 7th in the NFL. The Titans offense is all about establishing the run and making efficient passes after the fact. Now, Los Angeles, in this week's Fantasy Points Market Report, the staff talked about Justin Herbert getting right thanks to his weapons finally all being on the field at the same time right before those fantasy playoffs. How convenient. Herbert completed 39 of 51 passes for 367 yards. That's about 7.2 yards per attempt and 1 touchdown for 19.5 fantasy points against the Miami Dolphins. And now he's compiled 274 plus passing yards and 18 or more fantasy points in 4 straight games since Keenan Allen returned to the lineup, per Tom Broly there. Now this week, Herbert and the Chargers face a Titans defense that is allowing the second most passing yards on a per-game basis at 294.8. Xavier Howard had no answer for Mike Williams last week, and this week, I'm not sure the Titans secondary even knows the question at this point. After several weeks missed due to injury, Williams did go out there and pretty much knock off 24 fantasy points for fantasy managers while on a snap count. And this week faces that Titans defense that is allowing 46 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers and have allowed 786 yards and 7 touchdowns over the last 4 weeks. On the season, those numbers translate to roughly 192 yards per game and 13.5 yards per reception. And after last week's 12-catch, 92-yard performance, Allen now has 10 career games with 12 or more receptions, which is the most such games, breaking a tie with Wes Welker. Since Allen's return, he is a wide receiver 5 in fantasy, posting 70.3 fantasy points in the last 4 weeks, and you should probably expect the Chargers offense to continue to get in sync the longer that Mike Williams remains in the lineup. Allen saw 27.4% of the targets last week versus Williams' 11.7% and Eckler's 15.6%. And I would expect Williams to see a closer to a 19% target share moving forward, probably cutting into Gerald Everett and Josh Palmer's cut. I mean, you're not going to take it away from a man who has more receptions than Devontae Adams, more rushing yards than Alvin Kamara, more receiving touchdowns than DJ Moore and Mike Evans, and more rushing touchdowns than Joe Mixon, Christian McCaffrey, and James Conner. Are you? Now, speaking of touchdowns, can we get some touchdowns in Washington as the New York Giants are taking on the Washington Commanders? Now, I'll be honest, I was originally pissed when my Raiders and Patriots game got flexed out of this spot in favor of these two teams that literally tied each other just a couple of weeks ago. Then I watched the Raiders on Thursday Night Football, and I completely understood. Both the Giants and the Commanders enter this week's contest at 7-5-1, with the Commanders holding the 6th playoff spot in the NFC playoff picture, while the Giants are clinging on to that 7th and final spot with the 7-6 Seahawks and the 6-7 Lions within striking distance. When your top receivers are dudes by the name of Darius Slayton, Isaiah Hodgins, and Richie James, you better find a way to protect your damn quarterback. Last week, the Eagles sacked Daniel Jones 4 times. Then they got after Tyrod Taylor 3 more times. In week number 13, it was much the same as the Commanders' front. They got at Daniel Jones on 4 occasions. Trust me, Daniel Jones is going to need all the time afforded to get the ball down the field this week. If he does manage to get a little bit of time to digest what the defense is trying to feed him, then Jones will be certainly looking Slayton's way there. And since week number 7, Slayton has assumed a 20.7% target share, which works out to about 6 targets per game and 71.4 yards per contest. Back in the first meeting, Slayton pulled in 6 of 8 targets for 90 yards and was a top 24 fantasy option at the receiver position. As mentioned earlier in the injury report, Richie James may not be available for this contest due to a concussion, so you're going to want to monitor that situation leading up until kickoff. Now, Saquon Barkley is another player that I simply cannot trust as we enter the first week of the fantasy playoffs. The last time that these teams met, Barkley averaged 3.5 yards per carry on his way to a 63-yard performance there, in which he had a score. He also added 5 catches for 18 yards. Heck, Vanilla Vic, a.k.a. Daniel Jones, he led this Giants rushing attack with 71 yards on the ground the last time that these teams had met. And I'm not sure if the Giants do or do not trust Daniel Jones, but he has been the most consistent playmaker this season. In fact, Barkley hasn't averaged more than 3.5 yards per carry in a game since November 13th against the Houston Texans. Last week, we heard all about those net concerns there, and when Sunday rolled around, he was limited to 48 yards on 9 carries and 2 receptions while playing just 31% of the Giants' snap. Trust issues, people. Trust issues. Now, I wouldn't be shocked if Barkley is once again on a snap count, so you can always put your faith in Gary Brightwell there and Matt Breida if you want. For Washington, looking at the top run game mismatches, and the Commanders' 3.18 rush grade against the Giants this week is one of the more favorable matchups on this week's slate. Back in week 13, Robinson had 21 carries for 96 yards against this Giants defense, a defense that has allowed 8 rushing touchdowns to backs in the last 4 weeks. Look for a similar performance, but add a touchdown to that total this week for Robinson. Since week 10, Robinson's numbers mirror what we saw in week 13, as he has been averaging nearly 95 yards per game while touching the ball 21 times per contest. And when you face a defense that has allowed 615 rushing yards and those 8 touchdowns in the last 4 weeks, then fantasy production is certainly bound to follow you. Further to all that, per Joe Dolan there on the mismatch report on fantasypoints.com, the analysis, it doesn't get much easier than this. Washington backs Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson, they had 135 yards on the ground the last time that these teams met. The Giants were non-competitive in week number 14 against the Eagles, and they got toasted by Miles Sanders there on the ground. The Giants, they could get a big boost if Leonard Williams' neck can play this week, but he is questionable. Also going back to week number 13, the Giants, they sacked Tyler Heineke 5 times there, but that didn't stop him from tossing the ball around the playground, connecting with Jahan Dotson 5 times, Curtis Samuel 6 times, and Terry McLaurin on 8 occasions. McLaurin's 8 receptions, that resulted in 105 yards and a touchdown. The Giants, they've been pretty good against receivers in fantasy this season, allowing the 11th fewest fantasy points to the position, but Terry McLaurin, he don't care about no stinking matchups, especially with Heineke under center, who has pelted McLaurin with targets all season long. How about 30.85% target share, 27.3 end zone target share with a 51.1% air yard share? The Giants, they know where the ball is going to go, but can they stop it this week? And we aren't going to stop you from letting us know what are the games, what are the matchups, what are the headlines that have you excited here for week number 15. And make sure, I'm telling you this right now, big news coming here from Fantasy Points. We have the early bird special going on. That's 30% off your subscription. That includes the 2023 season and the rest of this year. 30% off right up until the Super Bowl. You do not want to miss out on that savings. Now, make sure you are subscribed to the Fantasy Points YouTube channel so you do not miss out on the weekly lineup there, starting on Mondays with the Monday Grades with Wes Huber, 9 a.m. Eastern. Tuesdays, plugged in DFS review with Scott Baird, JM to win. That's coming at you at 2 p.m. Eastern. Wednesday, we got the midweek's mailbag there with Nick Script. And every Tuesday through Friday, Joe Dolan and the daily lineup is coming at you at 9 a.m. Eastern. Of course, if you're watching this, then you full well know that at 8 p.m. Eastern on Fridays, we get the Friday Night Hype Show with me, Matt Donnelly. I cannot wait to get on to this week number 15. Fire up them fantasy football playoffs. Let's bang a gong. Let's get it on. Here we go.